Abby, Chad, how are you? Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Hi.
Hello. Hello. Doing well.
We're just waiting for folks to join and also for Tim and Francisca to join as well.
I'm attending a
Nice.
webinar talking about how people buying data software in enterprises. From the guy, the head of data at Convoy.
People in the company should attend this.
I know, that's why I joined.
Me.
Seems like Zenny wasn't on mute.
Seems that way.
I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries.
It's nice to see you, Apurva.
Nice to see you as well. Have you traveled anywhere for the summer or been around in the city?
I actually just got back a couple of days ago from Costa Rica. So it
How was that?
was lovely, actually. It's nice.
I guess Chad has been busy working. I see his LinkedIn posts almost every other day. Chad, have you traveled at all for the summer or just been around?
Yeah, I mean, I went to the Philippines for a month, which was amazing. Yeah, and then I got back, and sort of as it goes, the whole world sort of changed again within Convoy. So haven't had the time to get out. So I'm really glad that I was able to take a month-long vacation before the stuff hit the fan.
Just texting Tim to see if he's joining. Otherwise we can kick off in like a minute or so. Abby and Chad, as we're waiting for everyone else to join, maybe we can start with your intros and a quick background. It'll be super helpful. Maybe we can start with Abby. If you can walk through your quick background and all your experiences, both as a practitioner as well as a buyer of software, and be great to do the same for Chad as well.
Yeah, of course. So what do I do? No, I've been in tech a little over 2 decades. All of it's been on the enterprise infrastructure side. So I've done a lot of different jobs, a lot of different companies. Most recently, I was CTO at Puppet. That also included the responsibilities. I also ran product design, engineering, and security. And we were acquired in May. So I've been taking some time off following the acquisition. Prior to that, I was CEO of Cloud Foundry Foundation, the open source home of Cloud Foundry, a platform as a service. Prior to that, I did product at Pivotal. Is there a question? And Yeah, I've done a lot of different things over the years, but I'd say I've been hyper-focused the last decade on cloud native, and that ecosystem, and obviously spent a lot of time in open source. I'm also an active angel investor, and I sit on the board at Lightbend.
Thanks, Abby. Chad, it'd be great to hear from you as well.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm Chad. I run the data platform team at a company called Convoy, which is a late stage Pacific Northwest freight marketplace. So we make all of the data infrastructure and machine learning infrastructure buying decisions. And before this, I was at Microsoft working on their artificial intelligence platform team. We also bought a lot of products. We were responsible for some of the internal machine learning and experimentation and metrics computation infrastructure at Microsoft. Then I did similar work at Sephora and Subway Corporate as well. So I've mainly been on the enterprise side. Convoy is really the first smaller stage, like startup-y company that I've done work for. Oh, and then I'm also an angel investor, advisor, and all the stuff.
That's great. I think it'll be great to kind of hear both of your thoughts coming from both the data infrastructure side and the software infrastructure side. The founders kind of building in both of those domains on the channel today. But I'll hand it over to Tim to just like moderate the session from here.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Pooba. Cool. Let's get this started. Thanks for. I'm Tim, by the way. You know, Pooba, me, and Francisca. We started Go to Market for Dev. I was a founder before, so I was trying to sell to folks like Chad and Abby before. So I have all kinds of questions I'm prepared for. If you've never joined our session before, feel free to post any questions in Zoom. It's an interactive thing, so. As we discuss, as we ask questions, if anything you'd like to ask, just write your question in Zoom. I will ask it and hopefully have an interesting and really educational time together. So cool, let's get started. So I guess Chad and Abby, I was a startup founder before trying to sell, right? And it's super painful to sell a startup product. And so I want to maybe go back to talk about what the process will look like. Because I think both of you, I know Chad for sure, and Abby, if you bought a startup product before, what did this process looks like? Well, how did the first engagement happen? What was the process and you have to do internally to make that finalized? I think most people, especially your technical backgrounds, you'll know exactly how that looks like at all. So maybe Chad, you can start, talk about maybe one product you had to be the part of the process for and how that went.
Yeah, so I can tell you the most recent product that we've purchased was Stemma, which is the hosted version of Amundsen, the data discovery tool. In terms of how that process went, it's really interesting. I find that the process changes quite dramatically depending on what's going on in the market. If you're sort of in like a up market, things are going really well, then it's super, super easy to get contracts signed. Like you can basically just say, hey, there's this company that I've been talking to. They solve a problem that's really important for me. Here's a quick rundown of all the things that they do, and here's what they're asking for, and you can get that approved. And in Convoy's case, being a startup themselves, like a couple weeks. But when things aren't looking so hot, which is the way that they are right now, and the market switches to more sort of profit-based growth versus revenue-based growth, there is a deeper need for, there's essentially a more critical eye that's applied to every contract. And so what the leadership team wants to know is, are we really being intelligent with the purchases that we're making? Are we ensuring that every product we buy is either has a direct translation to revenue or cost savings? And specifically on the efficiency side, Convoy's not doing a ton of hiring right now. So we need to make as much use of the people we have as humanly possible. And that requires a lot more effort on my part. So a strategy doc is usually something that I've been having to put together for the purchases that are on my plate right now. And that's listing out, why is this useful? Who are the customers going to be? How do things change from like not using the product to using it? How much is going to cost? Why is it paying for that much? Why isn't this something that we can build or buy elsewhere? Et cetera, et cetera.
Cool. And there's so much details, but we'll get into that, I think, what you just said. So Abby, maybe talk about your process as well.
Yeah, I think, Chad hit the nail on the head. I think it's entirely dependent on where you are in the cycle as a company. I went through a couple of different cycles at Puppet. Being obviously the executive approver, it was by the time it got to my desk, I was like, okay, why are we making this investment? And usually I was familiar with the technology, so I had a good handle on the use case and the business proposition associated. But I think at the end of the day, where we're heading now, and this was something that I was doing, at Puppet prior to our acquisition, which is also looking at all the tools and technologies we have. And I bring that up now because the market, particularly the macroeconomic headwinds we're heading into right now, that is a real and present conversation for you as a startup that's selling into any organization size. Because you're now you're selling a product in, and the questions that are going to be asked is, do we need yet another tool? And if so, why? And for many organizations, do we take something off the list? Because our list of technologies and services is pretty long. When you start factoring in your cloud-based tools, SaaS, APM, security tools, a mixed bag oftentimes of open source technologies as well. And it's not just a dollar line item that we look at, it's also overhead that you have from a team, a management, and an oversight standpoint. Another factor for me this year, when I was running my team, was also security. When Russia invaded Ukraine, and for most of us that are providing software to the enterprise, we all went into really strict shields up motion, which means security got a lot more stringent. As a company that provided software that was critical to governments and large enterprises, our software supply chain became something we talked about on a weekly basis. Security and I met every week. And I bring that up, even though you're not selling a security-based product, it is now part of the scrutiny. So now you're actually also being analyzed, not just as a tool based on the service you can provide and the value, but also this is one other thing I'm going to have to worry about from a security standpoint. And so, okay, are we prepared to make that accommodation? And if not, how are we going to manage that? And so there's a lot of different things, Tim, to your point, that you have to really think about when you're selling in. It's how do I, am I going to be able to provide value quickly? And if so, what's that look like? 2, how does this integrate into the existing set of softwares and technologies that a company or a team is running? And then 3, are they going to be able to quickly wrap their security and compliance practices around this? And, those are really hard questions to answer, but at the end of the day, that's going to be the questions people are going to be asking now. It's a lot less on how much does this cost and more what's the impact to my team and my organization and my business.
Yeah, it's super fascinating when we just even think about what the buying process looks like. It's not even just the people and what are things necessary from the startup side, right? It's actually internally navigating the macro and an internal and all this decision making here. So maybe I want to actually break it down. When you're a startup founder, which I was not that long ago, the first step, I guess maybe we'll just break it down step by step. The first step is actually figure out who to sell to, right? What is the first initial point of contact? And maybe if you can talk about what has been the best or worst engagement initially to both of you, because that's usually how startups think about it. I need to actually go figure out how to reach out to particular buyers and which person should engage with. So maybe Abby, going back to you again first now, what has been really effective way to get to reach you when I'm a buyer, right? And maybe what things you shouldn't do at all.
Well, I'd say The best and the worst are kind of the same thing. So it's a, I'd say, you know, the most annoying is the emails I get. Like as CTO, like I'm the approver. Like I shouldn't be your first stop when you're pitching your product, because I'm just going to go and ask my team. What do you think? Have you seen this? What's this? But the flip side is we've actually bought a tool that someone cold emailed me, and it was a VPN solution. And I was like, oh, this is super interesting. Tell me more. And so I think, you know, like I said, it depends on your product and your approach. But as CTO, I'm the final arbiter versus the initial decision maker oftentimes, although I will say I am guilty of bringing a lot of tech in and making my team sit through demos. But, you know, oftentimes I'm going to go back and say, okay, have you used this? Have you tried it out? Have you demoed it? You know, where we talk a lot in the startup ecosystem about product-led growth. We absolutely are in product-led growth, because I'm going to go and ask, are we running this anywhere? Have we demoed it? What does this look like? How easy is this going to be to stand up in our environment? And before we even get to what's this cost, what's the rollout, what's the impact? So I would say the strength is really largely in product-led growth motions, to get your foot in the door and to have those really in-depth conversations versus trying to have the conversation first and then following up with the product.
Got it. Actually, one follow-up before we go to Chad. What made that VPE reach out interesting? Because I'm sure if every single person is reaching out to different products, what made that one stood out? Like, oh, I actually want to engage on this one.
I got about 20 emails a day selling me products, as I suspect many of y'all do. But this particular one was from the investor and one of the exec team. He was actually the CEO and actually the lead investor on the product. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting. Let me dig into this. And it turned out to be a really great product, and we loved it. And it actually was head and shoulders above the product we were comparing it to that was similar. And, you know, we just ended up saying, okay, this is a much better product. So it just stood out because the outreach wasn't from an ISR, you know, some kind of sales rep that's just like, you know, sending you stuff on LinkedIn or email. He actually sent a thoughtful email to me, and it was from an executive. And he was like, hey, here's what we've got. Here's what we're doing. You know, can you give me a few minutes so that I can walk you through why I think this is exciting? And I think for me, it was both the story in the email, but also it was compelling because it was from an actual executive that was building something interesting. So.
Got it. That's helpful. Cool. So Chad, tell us, what are all the amazing ways people are reaching out to you too?
Yeah, I'll sort of do a +1 to what Abby said, in that, you know, when the CTO at Convoy reaches out to me about some interesting data startup, first of all, it almost never happens. And I'm more or less the first line of defense for like deciding on a glance, like if this is a company that we should spend time investigating or not. It's only happened maybe one time in the past year and a half, maybe even 2 years. And the reason that it happened, this is with Algorithmia, is that the reason that it happened is because the founder of Algorithmia was a good friend, or was a friend of our CTO. So that's the only reason that connection even happened. If it was just random cold outreach, most of the time the response is like, hey, you should just go talk to Chad directly. Like, I'm not really that familiar with this particular product space. So to sort of go a level deeper than that, what the advice that I would strongly give is find the person in the company that has the incentive to really want the product, and then target them. And that's going to be a different personas will have different incentives. So I run an infrastructure team. And so my incentive is to build really great infrastructure and to solve the problems of my customers, who are the internal data users of a business, the data analysts, the data scientists, and so on and so forth. What I understand are macro problems. I don't understand their specific problems, right? I'm not sort of looking over their shoulder as they're using a notebook or as they're writing a query in SQL. I understand the bigger problems that our organization as a whole faces. Our engineers are not having a good time talking to our data engineers. I understand that our pipelines are breaking. I understand that Tableau is not useful for a big percentage of the population. Those are the types of questions that I care about. And so if you can come to me, either really through any channel, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's email, whether it's like finding my number and sending me a text, like, oh, don't do that one actually, like that's weird. But if we want to do the first two, like I think that it's great to approach me and talk about the problems that I have. Usually when I have first conversations with startups, that's like generally speaking the thing I'm interested in the most. And maybe we'll get to that. Maybe that's a separate question and we'll get to that in a second. I do investigate startups that are brought to my customers as well. So if I have a data scientist or an analyst that is really passionate about something, I'm usually motivated and incentivized to do work. But my thought process is, okay, it seems like that this is solving a real problem. I may not necessarily understand what it is, but my job is to serve our customers. And so if we can purchase something that is great, then we'll do that. But I have to differentiate between real problems that I feel can be scaled across our organization and small problems that are only applicable to that particular individual or that particular team or that particular use case. So for me, as I'm the one that holds the strings to the budget, the more generalizable the problem can be, the better. The more it applies to infrastructure, the better. And if you're selling to, but the last thing I'll say is that it is not a bad strategy to sell to an IC or someone that has a problem directly in like a very traditional or a very, maybe traditional is not the right word, but I'll say a very sort of typical PLG motion. Get them using something and have them, maybe don't pay anything. And then once someone comes to me, like once an organization comes to me and says, hey, there's like 30 people in your organization that are using this product, we're about to hit the cap, and now it's time to sign a contract, like I'll take that very seriously.
Awesome.
Yeah, 100% to what Chad just said. Like that is, I will happily have a meaningful conversation if we're already using it versus, hey, I got this new thing. Now you need to figure out how to roll it out.
Yeah. And I think that's where all the PLG hotness is trying to go for. I think we'll get to that actually soon. One of the questions I think Krishna asked, and I want to kind of bundle it, because a lot of startups, when you just start, you have no customers, right? And so what you usually do is design partnership, trying to work with the company to sort of find a way to either get feedback early or actually do sort of like the design partnership way of developing the product together. Is there ways, so maybe talk about like how will startups, have you engaged in design partnership with startups before? And what also made the ones decide to do that? Or versus just, oh, come back when you have 5 customers already using it. Is there any of them that stood out in a way that I really need this now and I should engage with it? And any examples of what they've done right to make that happen? I think Chad will go for you first. And
yeah, I could talk about this one because I've done quite a few of these. The way that we typically, so I do like design partnerships, but it comes at a we recognize that there's a cost to that, right? There's a few risks with design partnerships on my side. The first risk is I have to recognize that there's a chance that this could go nowhere, and I'm spending potential resources on this thing that could go nowhere, and then I look foolish for investing my time. Of course, the company could fail or go under. You just decide it's not a good idea. They can also be like quite open-ended, which is something that scares me away from pursuing design partnerships. So if someone's like, hey, we're going to work with you for some like undetermined amount of time. I really have no idea what the timeline is going to be, but we're in the middle of building this product, and when it's ready, it's ready. It's like, okay, I don't really know about that. That seems pretty, that seems a little bit sketch. Where we generally tend to work with design partners is where there is a very specific problem that we are trying to solve, and it is usually either in our quarterly planning or in our yearly planning. Like, for example, one of the issues that we had going into 2022 was we have an internal experimentation platform that we built called Test Drive. That product was being maintained by around 5 engineers, some data people, and an engineering manager. When COVID happened, we had to downsize, and we had to move folks around our organization and off of Test Drive, which was a relatively stable product. But we needed to continue to maintain it, and we couldn't invest in Test Drive the way that we wanted to, or the way that our customers needed. So Test Drive was composed of a feature flagging system, a metrics repository, analytical dashboards, and so on and so forth. I didn't want to just deprecate the entire thing and retire it and say, hey, go back to the old state of the world, because teams were really happy using our product and they were getting a lot of value out of it. But it was super costly if we didn't have the team to maintain it. So I actually went out looking for design partners. Like, I was hoping that there were some startups that, well, first I looked for the various components of that platform individually, starting with the metrics repository. I didn't really see companies that met exactly what I was looking for. So I tried to get introductions from VCs to anybody that was working on the space. They eventually did put me in touch with the folks over at HelloTrace. I really liked how he was thinking about the problem. And I said, listen, I don't have any resources. Like, I can have one resource to sort of help you with this right now, and go back and forth with you. And you also have access to me. If we can set a timeline of like 1 quarter to put together a really, really strong like plan and a blueprint and MVP, and we can POC it all in a single quarter, I can go and sell that, right? I can go to my leadership and say, hey, we have a solution that does carry with it an element of risk. We don't know what's going to happen to this company in the future, but they've promised us XYZ, like they're going to make the code available to us in the case that they go under, whatever. And this is a huge problem. We have literally no answer to solve it. Those are the types of scenarios where design partners are really, really awesome. So I think to date, we've worked with maybe 4 or 5 different companies like that, and we're going to continue to work with more because it usually has a pretty good outcome for us.
Cool. Abby, do you have any examples of design partnership that maybe not you directly, but you've engaged with from a company point of view? And what are the examples that are done right as well?
Yeah, we worked with quite a few at Puppet as their design partner. One, and I like how what Chad said, it solved an immediate problem versus, wouldn't this be fun for us to do a design partner relationship? And I do think that, you know, from a startup perspective, I do think there's a lot of power in that, because what you really want when you do feedback with the design partners, you really want someone that needs this product and is going to use it pretty aggressively, because that gives you both validation on your use case and the shape of the product, but it also helps you start touching on those outlier type behaviors pretty quickly. Because if someone is using your product, really thoroughly, they're going to run up against those outliers really quickly, versus like, I'm just going through the use cases you gave me and seems fine. And so for us, there was a couple of products that stand out where we needed both of the products. Really, we needed them. They solved an immediate problem. And we looked at it as an opportunity as a customer to be able to both give feedback and help shape the roadmap of that product to really fit our needs. And that was that we saw that as a benefit, because it really allowed us to get, almost bespoke about a product to solve the problem that we had. One was in metrics for the engineering team, and another was in really managing our organization, which got to be really challenging given the size of it. And both of them were Eng-focused tools and products. And we had a lot of opinions, and we also had a sizable enough org that we could give meaningful feedback and understand the outliers and the outer bounds of the product. So it really will necessitate you finding design partners that want and need your product and can give you that, and have the time to give you that feedback. That, the flip side is too often startups that I work with, their design partners are companies that find the tool interesting, but aren't going to use it meaningfully. And so the feedback can be, it can be lukewarm because they're not really using it to the size and scale you need. And then obviously as a product leader, the challenge is always going to be, do I want to orient my product around what this 1 or 2 companies really want, or am I looking for a broader demographic? And I think the flip side for any startup is holding really firm to who your ICP is. Because if you're not clear on that, you can go down a rabbit hole and build a product for this one company that doesn't work for the next 200. And so I think there's always a lot of positives in those engagements, but there's a lot of risks that you have to really quickly balance.
Yeah, that's always super challenging because there's so many
Just
possible
to add
directions.
one more thing onto what Abby said before we go to the next question, Tim,
Yeah.
and to kind of answer this question as well, because I thought it was, I wanted to make sure I actually gave an answer to that. Like, at least for Convoy, we always prefer companies with products built, like almost 100% of the time. Abby sort of pointed out security. That is a huge thing usually with design partners, right? They don't have that security in place to start off with, and that takes a long time to do. They don't have like SSO and things like that. So that's a bit of a struggle. However, if the product, and this is something that we've been sort of a methodology that we've been using org-wide, not just within data, is that if the product that you are looking at is not actually sufficiently solving the problem, or it's not sufficiently addressing the use case, maybe it gets us 50% of the way there, it's better, and this is something that we've committed to investing in, it's something we think we need to be able to solve, it's better to just build it ourselves than to use something that's not ideal for our use case. Like, we would rather take a couple engineers, put together an MVP, build it the way that we want to build it, and prove internally that we know how to solve this, then go and spend, $200K or $500K on something that we know from the very beginning is probably not going to be ideal for us. So that's where the design partner relationship like really comes in handy, and that's almost always where we end up using it, is where we know there's something we need, the current market doesn't really address it, we're not willing to spend money to solve this problem imperfectly, and we have a choice between building it ourselves or relying on a team. And relying on the team is just like a smarter approach. We can offload a lot of that work to someone else and sort of work with them, like Abby said, to help influence the roadmap.
Cool. And I think we'll keep on the design partner train here. Approver already asked the question, and I'll be adding one more question on top of this. But basically, we're asking like, what are ways startups can set expectations and milestones so we can turn design partners to be actual paying customers? What are maybe, because Chad, you have some experience, that I'm sure Abby, you too, what are some examples that you've made that process? Like, when it's design partnership and we actually have successful delivery and turn into a paid product, what are things that are very key here that needs to happen in between?
Yeah, maybe I can go first on this one. So the things that we've saw on expectation setting. So first of all, like, I'm very busy. I have a lot of things that I do on a daily basis. I'm in a lot of meetings, and your startup, I realize it's the most important thing in the world for you, but it's like 1%, maybe less than 1% of my mental bandwidth. And so it's always extremely helpful if you can make it as easy as possible for me to advocate for your product internally. If I have to do a lot of work, like if I have to write up a 3-page document and bring in a bunch of people on my team, and then I have to convince them and have the conversations, the likelihood that it's going to stall out at some point just because I'm like, screw it, I don't have enough time to deal with this right now, I have actual like real burning things I need to go solve, your thing is probably it's just gonna be the first thing that goes, and that's sort of how it is. So the easier that you can make it on me to make that case, and to help me figure out like, hey, these are the specific problems that we're going to solve. This is what we propose the timeline should be. This is what we're going to deliver to you by this date. This is when your customers are going to be able to access it. And I'm going to put all that together for you in a single document. We'll put your name on it so you look like the author, and then you can blast this out to your customers and your leadership. Oh my God, that is like, it is a lifesaver for me. And the companies that have actually converted from like design partner to someone where we're now paying a contract have universally done that very, very well. They've made that transitionary process super simple for me as their internal advocate. So that's one thing that I really recommend doing. And then sort of on the same point is doing all of that as quickly as humanly possible. part of the problem that I found with a lot of these introductory calls and introductory meetings is that we spend way too much time talking about your product. Like you walk me through the architecture diagram, you walk me sometimes through, like we do a demo and we sort of talk about like you press these buttons and you get all these things. And I get it, like it's very exciting and you've worked hard on it. But what I'm trying to do in my mind is map your solution to the problems that I have. And again, like that consumes mental bandwidth. And so the more time that I have to spend doing that, the less likely it is it's ever going to go anywhere. And so if we can invert that and say, hey, here's like 10 problems that our product solves really, really well. Which of these do you have? And then based on that, I can immediately tell you what the specific use cases are. And then we can work around those use cases. Like that's a great way to transition from like specific use case to actual implementation to like, if I sign a contract, we will be able to solve like these like 3 or 4 things.
Yeah, +1 to everything Chad said, like just come in strong with a value prop so that you can educate both the users, but also the buyers really quickly. So you're not putting it on the users to make that argument when it comes up for approval. But clarity and communication is super helpful. What I don't want to allocate is someone from my team to manage you and your product process. That's just overhead. And, you know, as Chad pointed out, we're all busy. We've got things to deliver against. And your product is a nice to have. It is not a requirement. And so coming in it with the frame of mind, how do I make this as easy and frictionless as possible? But also, how do I clearly communicate how we're going to align against those use cases? So it's not just even mapping to the use cases, like Chad said, it's I'm going to be really clear and I'm going to update you regularly on how we're mapping the roadmap, the feature functionality to that, so that you can make use of that as quickly as possible. You're not having to go figure that out on your own time.
Yeah, I remember there was a startup that was giving us a pitch one time, and they sort of gave us an entire demo, and then at the end of the pitch, they said, do you think your analysts would find this useful? And I was like, dude, like, so I have to go and then have another meeting with my analyst to present your product on your behalf and say, would you find this thing useful? Like, I'm just not going to do that. I don't have the time to do that. Right. It's like, it's not going to be in my top 10 priorities.
Nobody's going to do that, Chad. Like there's literally nobody that's going to be like, yeah, let me go and pitch your product to my other team over here. That sounds like a good idea. Like nobody's going to do that.
Yeah, so this is how passionate I am and how much work and all the good names, logos I have. You know, there's so much gold here. I'm sure we have not all the details and questions, but I actually do want to touch on what you just talked about, because you have to able to help advocates and help sell internally, right? And I think as a founder before, I think I've seen processes, but never really been that much involved. What is a good, maybe back to the question again about this document, right? You have to know how to help advocates and sell this internally. What is a good document or sales pitch or something that's, okay, this is really, really helpful for me. What does good look like? I guess, what does that quality look like? What should it include? Like, what is the level of information or ways that it speaks about what's that say, okay, this is super clear for me, right? And I buy them. Because I'm sure everybody has an idea what that is, but what I learned is that actually is not easy to translate into other side of the world. And so maybe you can talk about like what is a good way to propose that and help, and what should include there?
Hey, Chad, how about I'll start from an executive standpoint and you can help it take it to another level. Okay. But as an executive buyer, like what I want to hear is, what is the value prop to us? And it needs to be a really solid value prop, not like, hey, this is a tool that helps your security be like 5 times better. Like, okay, cool. That doesn't tell me anything. So it's more of, here's an actual meaningful value prop, going back to Chad's point about use cases. And here's the use cases this solves in our organization. The second question I'm going to ask is, okay, what is the overhead? What's the burden on the team to implement this product? And I'm not just talking about what the SaaS products, we just light it up. There's usually an integration. There's usually training, there's education, there's documentation. We talked about security and compliance. So getting it through security compliance, getting it approved, getting it reviewed, legal, what's legal's stance in terms of getting engaged on contract reviews? What's the overhead on our team? And then the third question is obviously price. And then actually next to before price is obviously integration. Does this integrate with other products? Is it similar to other products that we're currently using? And if it's similar, do we drop one of those other products? Because I will say personally, I'm very a buy versus build. Chad, I'm sure we would have lots of debates on buying versus building, because we need to focus on building our core product and what we're good at. I want to buy anything else. I don't want to build it because I don't want to manage it. And so for me, it's really about, okay, how does this integrate? What's the price point? And then what's my extended price point? So the price point isn't just how much does this software cost every month or every year? How much do I have to spend to maintain it and manage it? And what does that look like? And so those are things that I would say, if you gave me a document that outlined each of those, I'd be like, oh, great. This makes it super simple. And either this is a yes or a no, or, there's further conversation we can have here. But I'd say today, in today's environment, I suspect those are actually far more scrutinized than maybe they were 6 months ago, a year ago, when we were all like, particularly for those well-funded startups who are spending like there's no tomorrow. I suspect people are now like, okay, let's have this conversation. Like, okay, what's the value prop and what's the expense to me, both in terms of human capital and actual financial capital? And Chad, I'm sure I've missed something.
I mean, I think you did a great job. I mean, that's basically how I think about it as well. What I usually recommend is, like, when we're putting together those documents, we want to be as explicit about the problem as we possibly can and get as detailed as we possibly can, and provide as many use cases as we can as well. I find that executives respond tremendously well to like two things. The first thing is a dollar amount. If you can point to a dollar amount and you can clearly articulate like why you're either going to be making that amount of money or you're going to be saving that amount of money, like, we're going to take 25% off your Snowflake bill and here's how. Boom, great, sign it. The other thing that I find they typically respond really well to is if it doesn't fall into one of those two categories that you can clearly articulate like a strict dollar amount. It doesn't mean that it's a bad product, but you have to tell a good narrative. Like you have to tell like a good story about like, why is this a problem that we're experiencing? Who at our company is actually being impacted about it? Like what is that impact on sort of their daily work? And then how does that manifest in terms of, either bad things happening to the business or good things happening to the business once the problem is solved? So I can give you an example of this, right? So I'll sort of, like I said, we were using Stemma now. Previously, we were using Amundsen. And the problem, and we captured this in a document, but the problem was Amundsen is open source. We onboarded to it relatively early in its life cycle, in our life cycle. This was like a few years ago. And we thought that we were being smart and clever. And so we forked it to do some fun machine learning things. Then we had a downsizing. Amundsen was rapidly growing out of date. We were like multiple versions behind. It would have taken us around 3 to 4 engineers just to get us back up to par. We had a full engineer that was spending all their time sort of supporting it and solving bugs and all these other things. And we had a worse version of the tool that we were using. So when you combine all of those issues together, not even looking yet at the product and the features that Stemma provided on top of that, just looking at that problem as a cost saving component, we could very easily make the case for why we needed to move to a hosted version in a narrative. And then, like Abby said, like the rest is sort of about like, what is the cost? The other thing that's important to communicate is that there were other solutions that were evaluated. This is definitely something that I think you can help with and provide context on. Some teams will go and do a whole bunch of evaluation work before they start any partnership. We don't really need to do that much. I'll sort of do a scan. I know a lot of folks in the industry, so I can have a rough gauge on like whether or not we need to talk to a lot more people. And then the next is, what is the anticipated cost? What is the timeline? And that's generally the information that you need. But the problem piece, especially if you cannot point to an explicit dollar amount, which a lot of data infrastructure companies cannot, the story has to be super tight.
Yeah. Plus one to that, you know, it's you have to have a good story other than this is another product that, and for me, also as a buyer, there has to be really significant value prop. And I say this in a way to mean, I don't want to hear that your product is 10% better than a competitor I'm already using. Because I'm not going to spend the time and effort to rip something out and put something in for a 10% improvement. I'm just not. And following that is, there are good products. Like, so for example, we were using an engineering metrics product. I looked at another product and we had a demo, and the product that they had was better. I would say it's about 15% better. You know, it was a better product. But then the conversation we had later was, okay, now is it worth our time to spend pulling this other product out, putting this other product in, pulling people off of the work they're already doing to reintegrate this into GitHub and put the metrics in and then educate people on how to look at the new data? And we're like, no, it wasn't worth it. So I don't care that it was a incrementally better product. There wasn't enough value prop there for us to rip it out. And even though it was actually cheaper, it wasn't that much cheaper. So for me, there really had to be, you know, going back to Chad's point, there has to be a very significant value prop there for me to do the work, because you're taking people off of other work that they should be doing.
Well, awesome. We will have a stream of questions all around value prop. So I think we're going to stick on this train for some time. So I think Zenny, Apurva, and Pablo all asked the same questions around value prop. So let's kind of go down into it. So first off, what is the ways to engage to know what is the top priorities for the buyers? I think what probing questions vendors should ask here. And I think that's what Zenny was talking about. Best ways to learn as much as possible before you jump on a call. So what are the most effective ways to do that? Let's start there, I think. Yeah, Abby, do you want to go first?
Yes, put on your consultant hat. Pretend you're a consultant. So I'll give an example. And this is also a cheap annoyance of mine. I'm in DevOps and I'm in cloud. So spending the first 20 minutes explaining to me the challenges in DevOps and cloud, not useful, good use of my time, because I'm familiar. So maybe focus in on asking questions instead of starting with, going back to Chad's point, giving me their product pitch. Like, hey, how are you feeling in this area? Are you struggling with XYZ? Well, I am. Well, great. Let's double click on that. Walk me through that a bit more. Asking some more questions versus going through your normal pitch deck and your normal cadence of narrative is a much better conversation. Because like I said, for me, I can't tell you, I worked at Puppet. Puppet is a DevOps company. We obviously know automation and DevOps really, really well. So spending 20 minutes explaining the state of DevOps and automation is just annoying. It just annoys the shit out of me. And I'm just like, okay, yeah, obviously you don't know who you're talking to. So maybe you should have Googled for 5 minutes before you got on this call to say, I think you know what you're talking about. Maybe I skipped this part of my intro and focus on what I can solve for you. So I think I'm telling a little bit of this is a little bit of an annoyance thing for me. And Chad, you're laughing. I suspect you've had someone explain to you this problems with data as well when they start their pitch. But I think really focus in on, hey, this is something I've been working on. Let's talk through how this might affect your environment is a much better use of time. And going back to Chad's point about how busy we all are, it's a good way for you to also kind of dig in to say, here's the problems this can solve in your environment. And it gives you a great chance to do a follow-up conversation to say, and here's how I can help you. That's my rant in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally on board. There's like pitches that I've sat through for 20 minutes where I'm like, yep, I understand everything that you're saying. Like, it's just not useful, and yeah, like it's annoying. And I think you don't want to annoy your primary sponsor, right? Like you want them to be excited and super gung ho about what you're building. what I oftentimes recommend people do is start with like a very concise set of problems that your company solves. And I don't mean like generic things, you know, I don't mean like, oh, like, you know, is your is working with data hard? It's like, yeah, duh, that's like that's my whole job, right? Like if you can give me something like very specific and concrete that and maybe it's something that I won't empathize with. Like maybe you'll give me a set of problems that your product solves really well and I'm like, yeah, I don't actually empathize with any of those. And that's great. That's a good thing because that means I'm not a very good design partner for you, and we can get that conversation out of the way in the first like 30 seconds of the meeting, and we can both go back to our lives, right? I don't have to spend an hour listening to you do your demo. You've wasted your time, I've wasted my time. So if you say, you know, really concretely, I do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's these like 6 or 7 problems. Do you experience these? And if you experience any of these, like how big of an issue are they for you, right? So if I say, yeah, I experienced 2, 3, and 5, 2 of them, I understand that they're problems, like they do impact me, but it's just stuff that we've like accepted is probably going to be on the back burner. Like I'm just not going to focus on it this year. But 2 is actually like solving that is actually part of my, you know, yearly roadmap. And I don't have a great solution on how to do that. Like, okay, well now let's go into that. Like, what is the specific reason that you're focused on 2? And I could break that down for you. Well, the reason that 2 is important is because like we have a team depending on this for like this data and this data and this data, and it broke sort of over this time period. And we had these like security issues, and this is costing this much in revenue. You're like, okay, great. Now that you have that use case, you can build your entire pitch around that, right? You can say, here's how we would apply our product to solve this like very particular problem that you have. And if you can illustrate that really well, you've got me, like I'm hooked. Even if I don't even necessarily believe that you have the ability to do that, which is oftentimes the case because startups will just like say random stuff. They'll say they can do everything, but you've still given me hope that I'm like, okay, there's like a problem that I would have had to invest, you know, 5 of my own resources in. And I was planning on doing this over a period of 2 quarters. And here I have someone coming to me telling me that they could solve it sort of on their own. I don't quite understand it yet, but it would actually be like a dereliction of my responsibility as the owner of our data products, not to go into this further and at least like figure out if it's a good solution or not, right? So like that's sort of how I recommend finding the value proposition. And if you can hone in on that set of problems and be very, very concise, when you're putting together that document that I talked about, you're just listing that. All you have to do is just list those problems and then say, yeah, here's how we solve them. Here's how the world would change for you. And then, and you're done. You basically got it.
Awesome. I think you already answered Pablo's questions of how to refine value props as well. So Pablo, if you feel like any more questions, definitely feel free to chat in Zoom. Let's move on to, so maybe let's just stay on this design partnership a little bit. I think one question Apurva have is also like, hey, how do you keep your sponsor or engaged the whole time? Because everyone's busy, as you mentioned, right? Like what are the most effective best practice or tips you've found people working with you, even during the sales process, I guess, right? Design partner or sales process to keep people engaged that can move the process hopefully faster. So Chad, if you have any good examples you can share.
Yeah, so there's a few ways that I've seen this happen successfully. The most excited that anybody is going to be about your project is going to be at the very beginning and at the end when it's done and we're about to like roll it out to all of our customers. The tough part's in the middle. And so what I've seen happen, and this is not just with me, but it's sort of with other, you know, platform owners that end up doing these like design partnerships, is that if your initial sponsor is not kept engaged from the very beginning, like they will drift. They will drift because like life is pulling them in 1,000 different directions. But if you can say, if basically, I guess what I'm talking about is like habit building. So if you can say, listen, every week or every 2 weeks for 30 minutes, we're going to meet on a Tuesday. We're going to walk through our process. We want you to be there. We want your like whoever the primary resource that is supporting us on the implementation, like they're going to be there. We're going to tell you how we're doing and like. Yeah, like this, it's going to be essentially like a stand up or a status update. And if you can even keep that fast, like, yeah, we'll just do it for 15 minutes right in the morning, right after your stand up. That's like a great way to keep engagement going. The folks that don't do that, it's like I end up like so I'll tell you sort of what I do is I will say, hey, here's a data engineer or here's a software engineer. They're going to help you with implementation. Then I'm going to go solve these other problems. Oftentimes I'll get status updates from them. But if I don't hear from you over a period of months, like I'm gone. Like my brain is on another subject now. So you just have to recognize that the more that you can keep someone engaged from the very beginning when they're excited, the more likely it is that they're going to have they're gonna be there for the end. The other thing that I would recommend is like just because you're building out the product doesn't mean you have to stop looking for problems and stop looking for use cases, right? Like one of the solutions that we're implementing today, it has actually morphed to be like 3 times greater. Like the product has expanded to be like 3 times greater than what it originally was, because that particular CEO has done a really, really excellent job at continually like working with us to bring in other potential solutions. And so the actual example is like right now we serve up data products in our app, like in Convoy's app, to an end customer. And we were having, and so he was asking me about that. And he was like, hey, is this something that you guys do? I said, yeah, it is. And he said, okay, well, now that we already kind of have a POC in place, what if we just provided this as like a little beta tool, like an endpoint or something that people within your company could hit and they could try to build simple React apps on top of and see if it's like a problem they have. I'm like, well, I know this is a problem they have because they were just talking to me about it. So I'm going to go and bring in those other people as well. So the value just kind of like kept snowballing. And that's like another way it kept me like very interested, because the impact of the tool just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Cool. All right. So we're almost out of time. So I have the last few questions I think we have here. One is specifically about PLG. So what is a standout example? I think Luciano asked this. What is a standout example that a PLG product that gets spread out and you end up buying? Maybe, because I know a lot of PLG products, either you just buy a lot of seats or you actually have like an upper tier version, right? That's going to match on top. Any standout example that been successful and what they did well there? So, Chad, you want to go first? Or you got to think about it?
Yeah. So PLG example has worked really well. So there is we haven't signed any sort of deal yet, but it is like on the immediate roadmap. It's not a design partnership, but it is PLG Motion, is Streamlit. Streamlit sort of started off organically within Convoy. There was like a couple of data scientists that were using it to build some apps for some business partners. And over the last like 4 to 5 months, it's just exploded. Like it's being used all the time. My own team is using it for like totally unrelated things. And so really it's just been volume. Figma has also done this, by the way. Like it's not a product I manage, but that absolutely happened. Like our entire UX design team and a lot of our product managers were using Figma. And it's like, okay, well, this is just obviously a thing that we should go buy. Yeah, I mean, I hope that's not too basic of an answer, but it's been quite simple. Like you just get a lot of people using it. You get some organic adoption, and once it hits a critical mass, some leader from the team is going to come talk to me about like onboarding this, and I've never turned anybody down from that.
Yeah. So basically, how to spread like fire, right? Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Abby.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say it's exactly that. Like I think that's what Chad has described as the whole value prop for PLG. PLG isn't useful any other way, but PLG is great to get your foot in the door, not have to go through a whole POC, but you're actually having people use your product in meaningful ways. And then as it grows organically, then next, that's really where you can benefit from a salesperson following up and saying, hey, looks like you are using this broadly. Let's go talk to your buyer and say, okay, how do we talk about rolling either, one, buying more licenses, but two, the question I'm going to ask is this something we should standardize on? And okay, let's talk about really making this a much more meaningful product if it's got this broad reach of an impact. And that's really where the value prop conversation can come into play, because you can articulate one, the use cases, the value proposition to the organization, but then you can also back it up with the users that are already in play and say, here's how you can actually make this a much more broader application across your organization or across multiple organizations and multiple teams.
Awesome. So I think unfortunately we're running out of time. I don't want to go over at all. So there's always more questions we can answer. So I mean, one last thing, any ways people can reach any of you? What are our best channels to maybe have more follow-up questions? If able to share any like, is it Twitter or LinkedIn? We can share just last bits of details, how to ask for questions with you.
Twitter and LinkedIn for me, both are open. So if you want to reach out, you can. Twitter, I will put my details in chat.
Yeah, same for me. I don't have Twitter, but I do have LinkedIn. So there's mine. I put it in the chat as well if you want to follow up on any of this stuff.
Cool. All right, it's a wrap. Thank you so much, Chad and Abby. I think we learned so much. I learned a lot, and there's endless questions. So maybe we'll figure out. Maybe we'll come back for more. But this is super valuable. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. And we will share the recording for folks that were able to join. But yeah, thanks again. Spending the lunch with us, and I'm sure lots of folks will be thanking you afterwards. So yeah,
Thanks for having me.
for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good day also, guys. Bye.